Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary Podcast for people on the go. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'm joined this and every week by my friend and colleague, Dr. Amy Robertson, Biblical Scholar and Executive Director at Congregation Beit Haverim in Atlanta. This week, the Narrative Lectionary finds us in Mark 4, 1-34, in which Jesus teaches in a series of parables. We discuss the promise and problems of interpreting parables, what it means that Jesus says he teaches in parables so that people will not understand, and how the seed parables depict the kingdom of heaven taking root in the world in unexpected and uncontrolled ways. Also, we explain why you should not keep Jesus under the bed. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Amy.
Hello, Bobby.
How are you this week?
I am doing well. I have been watching documentaries about game shows, and that was a game show worthy welcome.
I was trying to do my Amy impression. I don't know if I got it right.
Well, I've watched.
Is that
a lot
more
of
like
game
Wink
shows
Martindale
in my day, so maybe I have the game shows are woven into my soul. That may be the case.
I wonder what it says about me that the game show host that I thought of first was Wink Martindale, who hosted Tic-Tac-Dough in like 1982.
I was gonna let that go.
So, Amy, this week we're moving in the Gospel of Mark to chapter 4, and this is a change of pace in the Gospel of Mark because we really, up until now, haven't had much access to Jesus's teaching. And we've commented a couple of times that it tells us that Jesus is teaching, but it doesn't actually tell us.
But it doesn't tell you what he taught,
So now, in this chapter, we get a series of parables that Jesus is teaching, partly to the crowd that is gathered around, and then partly, at least some of the interpretation, just to a small group of disciples. So one place to start is just to say that, so the word parable in Greek just means to throw alongside. So basically, what the word is saying is you just take two things and you put them next to each other, and you kind of say this one is like that one, but it's not always necessarily, and in this case, not really at all clear in exactly what way this thing is like this other thing. And so one of the interesting things about parables to me is that they invite that kind of curiosity about, well, what does it mean to say that the kingdom of heaven is like, a mustard seed or a field that has been planted? And that invites the listener into some kind of imaginative, creative exercise that doesn't necessarily have one right outcome. Like, in that way, it's really, I find parables really engaging because they open up in lots of interesting ways. And so one of my principles for reading parables is you shouldn't be looking for the one right answer to what the parable means, but kind of letting the parable, letting the alongsideness of the parable kind of open up possibilities that you can kind of wrestle with.
That is really interesting. And I really like the idea of parables inviting creative, imaginative engagement and sort of a sense of personal investment. Once you come to a sense of a parable that has meaning for you and makes sense to you, it's a lot different than just having someone give you that message directly, right? You've been invited into the process in a very personal way. So I think that that makes a lot of sense.
Now, of course, that leads you to thinking about the fact that in a first of these parables we're going to read today, Jesus then turns around and does explain exactly what it's supposed to mean. Hey, this means, here's what it means. Why didn't you get that? And so for me, what's happening there, and I don't know what you think about this, but the way I think about it is the parable itself probably actually belonged to Jesus. Jesus probably told a parable something like the parable of the sower. But then the interpretation put in the mouth of Jesus here, I think, is probably Mark's interpretation of Jesus's parable. That is to say, Jesus himself probably wouldn't have exactly said that, or he might have used the same parable in multiple ways on different occasions. So when you read the story, what you have is the parable Jesus told, which you can then play with creatively, and then you have Mark's interpretation of Jesus's parable, which is important.
That changes things a lot, and it kind of makes me want to. Are we ready to jump into the text a little bit?
So maybe what we can do is, just as we're going, when we read these parables, we're just going to talk about the parables, pretending like we don't know what Jesus is going to say the parables are about.
Yeah.
And just kind of see what the parable can do. And then we'll move on in the ones that Jesus interprets and say, okay, now this is what Mark's Jesus says this means. What do we do with that? So there's going to be kind of two levels of interpretation that might be a little bit in conflict with each other. Does that sound okay?
I love conflict.
Beautiful.
Let's take these parables for a ride.
All right. Jesus began to teach beside the lake again. Such a large crowd gathered that he climbed into a boat there on the lake. He sat in the boat while the whole crowd was nearby on the shore. He said many things to them in parables. While teaching them, he said, "Listen to this. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. When the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked the seeds, and they produced nothing. Other seed fell into good soil and bore fruit. Upon growing and increasing, the seed produced in one case a yield of 30 to 1, in another case a yield of 60 to 1, and in another case a yield of 100 to 1. He said, whoever has ears to listen should pay attention." All right, so when you listen to that and pay attention to it, where does your mind go in terms of what the parable is trying to do?
I think that the first two messages that come sort of quickly to me are the world is a dangerous place and your environment matters, and like it's not the seed's fault where it fell.
Yeah.
I guess I know I'm not supposed to do this, but it's a hard habit to break. I'm like picturing the seeds as people. I don't know.
No. Yeah, so the seeds could be people. And if you read the seeds as people, then what happens in your interpretation?
Well, many of them have a very hard time.
Yeah.
Really through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
They have been placed in a hostile environment where they didn't really have a chance.
Yeah. I think that's really a beautiful and important interpretation. So yeah, so those who do not take root and produce, they do it because they're on the path or because they got in the thorns or because birds ate them. Yeah. So like you can't expect every person in that interpretation to be able to take root, not because the seeds were bad, because because the farmer threw them on a path.
Well, right. And then if you picture the seeds as people, you have to ask, who's the farmer?
I mean, just if you read this just as a story, in my mind, what you have is a farmer who is just flinging seeds all around, hoping some of it is going to produce. He's not being very careful. You know, he could have tried to figure out like where's the best soil and like concentrated the seeds there, but he doesn't. He's just flinging it around. Some of it kind of predictably gets choked out by thorns or eaten by birds or sprouts and then dries out in the sun. But the ones that produce kind of a lot. You know, I was doing a little research. I was reading Eugene Boring's commentary in the New Testament library, and he was suggesting that in ancient Palestine that a reasonable yield would have been 4 to 1 or 10 to 1. Here, the worst case is 30, and the best case is 100.
100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's true, and I mean, I don't have any reason to think it's not, although I haven't done my research.
You don't know personally
about Palestinian farmers in the first century, but yeah, that the stuff that grows like really grows.
Right. So the parable's giving us a really big range here.
Yeah.
Some of the seeds you get bupkis, and some of the seeds you get an insane return.
Yeah, 10 times what you could have ever expected. Yeah. That's what the story is. And Jesus says, if you have ears to hear, listen. There it is.
There it is. I mean, so I feel like some of it for me really comes back to like, do we focus our spotlight on the farmer and the farmer's behavior, or do we focus our spotlight on the seeds?
Yeah. Or if you call it the parable of the soils, then what you're supposed to do is focus on the soil.
Right.
You know, so if you just leave it as an agrarian metaphor, like if you put yourself in the position of the farmer, that means like cast your seeds about and don't worry that some of them aren't going to grow, because the ones that do are really going to grow. If you cast yourself in the position of the seed, if you relate to the seed, then I think it's a little bit like good luck out there.
Sort of. I mean, like the fates will have their way with you. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And if you focus on the soil, then I think it's inviting you to think about what kind of soil are you? Are you soil that produces
Are you
something?
Hospitable? Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, the seed, and this might be because I don't know how much this is informed by what Jesus is going to say in just a minute. So, but for me, the seed is the gospel. The seed is the good news of the kingdom of God. And then you can read the parable in two different ways. One is as you're the recipient of the gospel and what happens to it when it gets to you. Are you good soil that produces, or are you not? But I actually think the more interesting way to read it is to empathize with the farmer and to say, like, Jesus is calling people to proclaim the kingdom of God. And so if that's true, then one could say, well, then the farmer here is the one who's out, like, spreading the good news. And then the message is something like, just throw those seeds out there, right? It's not a precision operation, this proclamation of the good news. You fling it. And some of it is going to take root and produce abundantly, and some of it's not. And that's not on you, right? Your job as the farmer is just to put it out into the world.
That's so interesting, because I think it's hard because, like, seeds are a finite quantity, presumably, for a farmer.
Yeah.
And so you could read that story as like, well, he wasted half his seeds.
Yeah.
And if he had planted all the seeds in the good soil, then he would be able to retire.
Yeah.
But the parable doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us what we're supposed to think of the farmer.
Yeah. There is a sense here in which, like, 3/4, I mean, I don't know how many seeds are in each category, but if they're equal categories, then 3/4 of the seeds get choked or scorched or eaten. And 1/4 of them are bountiful.
Wildly successful.
But I think that's important to say, yeah, some of the things that you try are not going to succeed. Maybe like 75% of the things you put out into the world are not going to succeed.
Yeah.
And you could get really...
So if you get really invested in each and every seed, you're going to be sad.
So I think there's probably like 1,000 ways one could read that parable, in ways that could produce kind of interesting ideas, like 100-fold. But Jesus interprets his own parable here in a minute. But first, he explains why he speaks in parables. So in verse 10, he's talking just to the people around Jesus along with the 12. So I guess, it's not clear to me if they're still sitting on the boat and they're just having like a sidebar, or if this is like the next day when they were by themselves. But anyway, Jesus is talking to the inside group right now. When they were alone, the people around Jesus along with the 12 asked him about the parables. He said to them, "The secret of God's kingdom has been given to you, but to those who are outside, everything comes in parables. This is so that they can look and see but have no insight, and they can hear but not understand. Otherwise, they might turn their lives around and be forgiven." Okay, then he's going to go on to explain the parable, but that's a really fascinating explanation.
That's infuriating. Doesn't that make you furious?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of teacher teaches intentionally in a way that will make it hard for people to understand? And I feel like that's what this is saying. Jesus is not saying we do it this way because it gets people's creative investment in the process and it makes people think more deeply and struggle with important messages.
Yeah.
It says we do it this way so that they won't understand.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, when I was a kid growing up in church and going to Sunday school and vacation Bible school and whatever, like, the explanation of parables was always Jesus taught in simple stories so that anyone could understand. And what Jesus has just said is exactly the opposite of that. Jesus speaks in confusing parables so that only the ones who already understand can understand. Now, Jesus there is referring in some kind of a way to Isaiah chapter 6. And Isaiah, in that chapter, that's Isaiah's call story. He sees God in the temple. God says, "Who will go for us? Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me." And then God says in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 9, God said to Isaiah, "Go and say to this people, listen intently but don't understand, look carefully but don't comprehend." And then his instruction to Isaiah, "Make the minds of this people dull, make their ears deaf and their eyes blind, so that they can't see with their ears or hear with their or hear with their ears or understand with their minds and turn and be healed." So in Isaiah, you have a prophet being commanded to speak God's truth precisely so that the people don't understand, because God doesn't want to forgive them.
Right, but isn't isn't Jesus' whole point that it's supposed to be different now?
I mean, Jesus here, and I mean, arguably in the Gospel of Mark, is creating a pretty strong insider-outsider dynamic. Some people get it, some people don't. By the end of the Gospel, we're going to see it turns out that no one actually gets it, which is kind of interesting that Jesus creates an insider-outsider, and then everyone ends up on the outside.
Okay, I'm gonna try on a different reading.
Yes,
Ready?
please.
We're gonna see how this goes. The fact that it's possible to fail at understanding is what makes it meaningful to succeed in some way. Like if there's no possibility of failure, then it's not such a meaningful endeavor in the first place. Yeah. I don't know how I like that theologically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I could talk about that in terms of like different endeavors one might take on in life and sort of what's at stake. And if nothing's at stake with anything, then it sort of gets boring pretty quick.
Yeah, I really like that. And, one of the things that's interesting is, so Jesus says, the secret of God's kingdom has been given to you, so you understand. But the context is the disciples have not understood. So what generates that response about, well, you already know, is the disciples saying, we don't know.
Right. No, we don't.
So there's this kind of interesting tension of like, even the people who know don't know they know. And I think that's related to what you're saying, that there is a sense, A, in which coming to understand is an accomplishment, and B, not understanding it entirely is not the end of the story.
It makes me think of Israel, the translation of Israel being one who struggles with God, and sort of the ways in which that sense of continuing to struggle continues into the Jesus story.
Yeah. So then Jesus says, don't you understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables? The farmer scatters the word. This is the meaning of the seed that fell on the path. When the word is scattered and people hear it, right away Satan comes and steals the word that was planted in them. Here's the meaning of the seed that fell on the rocky ground. When people hear the word, they immediately receive it joyfully. Because they have no roots, they last for only a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. Others are like the seeds scattered among the thorny plants. These are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of this life, the false appeal of wealth, and the desire for more things break in and choke the word, and it bears no fruit. The seeds scattered on good soil are those who hear the word and embrace it. They bear fruit, in one case a yield of 30 to 1, in another case 60 to 1, and in another case 100 to 1. So Jesus' interpretation is, this is an allegory.
Mark's interpretation, right?
Sorry.
Or what Mark says is Jesus' interpretation.
Yes. The way that I mean to talk about that is Mark's interpretation placed in the mouth of Jesus, is that this is an allegory in which the seed is the word, the soil is the people. We don't know who the farmer is still. And so how do you
pictured like the disciples as the farmers?
Maybe so.
They're going to spread the word.
You could read this parable as, on the first instance, an explanation of what Jesus is doing, where Jesus is the farmer, and like some of what Jesus says sticks and some doesn't.
Yeah.
And then in the second instance, this is then what the disciples, the followers, the early Christians are going to do. So, and you can see yourself as a follower of Jesus on both sides, like, am I good soil that's going to produce abundantly? And also then, as a farmer, like, am I putting the seed out into the world?
One of the things I struggle with is I keep wanting this. I want from this text instructions. Like, be this way. How should a person be, and what should a person do in order to, live into these teachings that Jesus is offering? And instead, it's, well, some people, when they hear, Satan immediately comes and takes away the word that was sown in them.
Yeah.
Well, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to do with that.
But there are some sort of instructions. They're just given negatively, right? So the first one is be aware of Satan, which is like, I don't know how you do that exactly. But the second one is people who are rootless, when they experience distress or abuse, they fall away. This is anticipating that people are going to suffer in some way because they are believers. And so it's saying when that happens to you, you need to have deep roots, right? So don't fall away. And then, so the CEB, the worries of life, the false appeal of wealth, and the desire for more things. I mean, that's kind of an interesting list of things that get in the way of the gospel taking root, is worrying about, the day-to-day and wanting to be wealthy and wanting to accumulate.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's exactly telling you what to do, but it is giving you some advice about the kinds of things not to do.
That's fair.
So then we get another set of parables in verses 21 through 25. Jesus said to them, "Does anyone bring in a lamp in order to put it under a basket or a bed? Shouldn't it be placed on a lampstand? Everything hidden will be revealed, and everything secret will come out in the open. Whoever has ears to listen should pay attention." So here we have the parable of the lamp under the basket. And this is where we get the little song. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine.
I know that song,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that verse. I only know the beginning of it.
I mean, so the plain sense of the parable is pretty obvious. Like, if you have a lamp, like, why would you stick it under a basket or under your bed? Like, the purpose of a lamp is to light things, and they can't do it if they're under things. Also, your bed might burn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did not have good fire safety.
They did not. So anyway, but then the interpretation, everything hidden will be revealed and everything secret will come out into the open. Thoughts about what Jesus is doing here?
I keep thinking that, like, I would definitely put a lamp under the bed because it's so dark and scary under there. And, like, that's where the secret things are, and that's how they're going to come to life. Light, not life. Oh, God, you don't want whatever's under your bed to come to life.
It'd be like a big dust bunny, like, don't do that.
But okay, so fun. I have to picture, like, oh, duh, there's, like, no other light in the room. Like, this is the only light. If this is the only light you have, put it where it's going to do the most good. And where it's going to do the most good is not under the bed. It's in that space where its light can, affect the most people.
I mean, to me, like, there's just a very, like proverbial wisdom way of reading that, which is basically, like, the truth's going to come out eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But when you place it in this context of this Jesus story, and in this...
Oh, I get it! Jesus is the lamp! Is Jesus the lamp? Oh, you have a weird look on your face. Jesus is not the lamp.
Wait, no, go with that, though. What happens if Jesus is the lamp?
You shouldn't put him under a basket.
I mean, that goes without saying.
No, okay, so maybe not Jesus, but, like, the truth, the word that Jesus brings.
Yeah.
Like, you wanted to reach the maximum number of people, and though there is still a lot of secrecy about who Jesus is and sort of the details of the message that he's bringing, it's all going to come out, and you'll want to, like, make it really front and center and not block its light in any way.
Yeah.
Like with a basket.
Yeah. Okay. Verse 24, he said to them, "Listen carefully. God will evaluate you with the same standard you use to evaluate others. Indeed, you will receive even more. Those who have will receive more, but as for those who don't have, even what they don't have will be taken away from them." So the first part, God will evaluate you with the same standard you use to evaluate others. Like, that's just saying, like, don't be judgy McJudge your pants, right? If you judge people, God will judge you. The second part, those who have will receive more, those who don't have, even what they have will be taken from them. Like, I can't read that as material possessions, but something like understanding or insight or something like that. Like, people who understand superficially are going to have, even their superficial insights are going to turn out to, like, are going to be taken away from them. Those who, like, understand deeply will be given more depth of understanding. But then I don't know how the two halves of that fit together. They really are very uncomfortable together.
Well, I think there is a nice symmetry in the idea that, like, there is between sort of the judgment that you put out in the world is the judgment that you receive back. And, like, if you judge a lot, you'll be judged a lot. If you understand a lot, the universe will help you understand a lot. Like, what you're starting with, what you're putting out there into the world will be reflected back to you.
Yeah.
So if what you put out there is lack of understanding, that will be amplified in a way that makes you even more confused.
Yeah. Verse 26. Oh, I love this one. Then Jesus said, "This is what God's kingdom is like. It's as though someone scatters seeds on the ground, then sleeps and wakes night and day. The seed sprouts and grows, but the farmer doesn't know how. The earth produces crops all by itself. First the stalk, then the head, then the full head of grain. Whenever the crop is ready, the farmer goes out to cut the grain because it's harvest time." That's a good story, right? I love that story.
It is. There's magic. Well, not magic.
If you read it in the spiritual context, it's probably like the Holy Spirit.
Right. There's a step that the farmer has to do. The farmer has a role in this, but the farmer's not actually causing food to grow. So the farmer has a role, right? There's the farmer has to do something in order for those seeds to sprout and grow, but it's a limited role,
Yeah.
right? The farmer's not actually causing new life and like there are other things happening here.
Yeah, I think this one is about the task of the farmer is to get the seeds onto the ground. And then it's interesting, the farmer has no idea what happens. And he's not actually even doing anything. Like he's not watering, he's not fertilizing, he's not, building a scarecrow. Like he's not doing anything. He just keeps going to sleep and waking up until there's the harvest.
It's an interesting sort of, I don't know if it's supposed to go together with the first parable or not, but I was thinking about like, well, how are we supposed to feel about that farmer throwing seeds all over the place? And this one seems to say like, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is again, this is a sense of like if the seed is the word, which I assume it is, then again, there's a sense of like people who proclaim the gospel, people who are sharing the good news, like they don't have any control over what it does. Like they don't have any idea what they're doing. So like all of these highly technical professionals, like really, we don't know anything. Like you put it out there and it does what it does. So I mean, on the one hand, there's a encouragement there that is like, if you're a farmer, you just go and put your seed out, and like it doesn't matter if you don't understand. And on the inverse, there's kind of a warning there about if you think that you know how to make the seed grow better, probably you don't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's really interesting to think about from sort of an evangelical, I guess, perspective. I don't know if that's the right use of that word. But instead of trying to ascertain who in your life might be ready to hear these things, just to say them, just to put it out there and kind of see what sticks.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, verse 30. He continued, "What's a good image for God's kingdom? What parable can I use to explain it? Consider a mustard seed. When scattered on the ground, it's the smallest of all the seeds on the earth, but when it's planted, it grows and becomes the largest of all vegetable plants. It produces such large branches that the birds in the sky are able to nest in its shade." So the kingdom of God is like a really big, in this translation, a really big vegetable plant. In your translation, it's like a really impressive shrubbery or something, isn't it?
Yes, it is impressive shrubbery.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things there that are interesting. Like in Luke, I think it's Luke, it's either Luke or Matthew, changes this so it's not a shrub, it's a tree. So like it becomes a great tree, which is a classical Hebrew Bible image of like, kingdoms and God's rule and things. So you're kind of expecting it's going to become the largest of all trees, but it just becomes like it's a pretty impressive shrub. It's like a shrub.
But the fact that it grew from a tiny little mustard seed, that's impressive.
Yeah, there's something here about the size of the seed versus the size of the fruit that is produced or the plant that is produced, but it's not as dramatic.
No, you're right.
As you might be anticipating.
Yeah.
So this person is carefully planting mustard in their like vegetable garden or their herb garden. And so you assume that they're either hoping to like, have some ground mustard in their chili, or that they want to use mustard for medicinal purposes or something. Like they have a reason for planting the mustard seed, and it is not to make a home for birds, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to say the kingdom of heaven is like planting this little tiny seed that then grows up to do something totally different than you meant for it to do.
Or it grows up to do additional things.
So you can't control, not only can you not control where the seed grows and how much it produces, but with the mustard seed, you also can't control like what purposes it ends up accomplishing in the world.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I think, again, it sits nicely alongside the idea that the speaker of the word cannot control whether or not the hearer of the word can receive it or how they receive it, and shouldn't worry about that too much.
So when you're reading these parables and you're thinking about your own community or our contemporary time, what are you thinking people might take away from this?
I think I struggle mightily with the use of parables as a way to teach and communicate. And it feels to me, I have like an emotional response to it that's like, guess what teacher's thinking kinds of
Yeah.
questions. You know, those questions, like they're just not good questions. Like how, I don't think it's like a good pedagogy. So I'm struggling with putting aside that and letting the text do what it's doing on its own. And so my sort of assignment here, and I think throughout our excursion through this gospel, will be to keep asking myself, like, let's assume that this is successful. So what was the goal? You know, instead of saying the goal in my head is such and such, like let's assume, so maybe this is trying to be disruptive, right? Like that's a really different thing than trying to teach a specific lesson, right? So I think in its sort of disruption to me, it's disruption to my sense of what it looks like to teach and to preach. That's where I see the power in this chapter.
Yeah, I like that.
I think everyone should do a sermon for this chapter that people will walk out having absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And see how that feels, and they can process their feelings during those snacks. You guys have snacks after service?
Sometimes, some places, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Bobby?
One of the things that I love about parables is it's not obvious what they mean, and so they make you wrestle, and they invite you in, and they give you multiple possibilities that are sometimes not easily reconcilable with each other. And in my mind, that is kind of worthy of the gospel, right? Like when you pretend or imagine that the truth of the inbreaking of God's kingdom into the world is something that ought to be easily explained, then I feel like you have done a disservice to it. You know, you've taken something that can only be spoken about in metaphor and parable, and you've said, no, like this is what that means. In some sense, like the complexity of the parables, I think, is paralleled by the complexity of trying to understand what it means. What is Jesus talking about the kingdom of God has come near? At the same time, this particular sequence of parables seems to me like what it's saying is, don't get caught up in the complicated nature, right? Like just put the seed into the world.
Right.
So in that sense, the gospel is really just that one line that Jesus is saying in Mark chapter 1, here comes God's kingdom, change your hearts and lives and trust the good news. And in a sense, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And like, that's what I think that parable about the farmer who plants the seed and then goes to bed every day and wakes up and then suddenly there's a harvest. Like, that's what I think that parable is saying, is sometimes we can get so caught up in the technicalities of how one does things that we forget that the message is actually the essential message is actually quite straightforward. The boldness of a simple proclamation maybe is all that really needs to be there, and that all of the other things that we tend to get caught up in are not essential to the process. So proclaim good news to the world, and it's good news. Like, if what you're proclaiming isn't good news, then like don't proclaim.
That wasn't it. Yeah.
And put that out there, and it will come to fruition in the way that it needs to come to fruition.
And I love that, and I especially love the fact that sort of the path to this message that, like, y'all are making this a little more complicated than you need to, is a really complicated path. But that is what draws you in, right? You have to discover that yourself. Yeah. And then to sort of land on that, and you've had an opportunity to use all your intellectual prowess and your creative imaginings and your thinking. And if you come to the idea that, like, oh, this is my role. Yeah. It's almost like it gives you space to use all of your energy, but that space doesn't have to be making the message itself more complicated than it actually is.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I enjoyed that conversation, and I feel like the seeds we have strewn about are coming to fruition.
I don't know. I think I see birds flying by.
Yeah, a couple of them seem to have gotten choked over there on the side of the road. But
it was so funny when I was reading that first part. I was like, "Oh, that bird was Satan!" Like,
yeah,
such a cute bird.
Yeah, it makes you look at birds differently when you go out in the world too. Yeah, there's a bird outside my office right now.
Well, you better watch out.
All right, Amy. So next week we are in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20.
We sure are.
I'm talking about a man possessed by a legion of demons.
That sounds very dramatic.
It is very dramatic.
I look forward to it. And I hope y'all have a great week. Thanks for listening.
See you next time. This has been another episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary Podcast for people on the go. Come back next week when we discuss the story of Jesus and the man possessed by a legion of demons in Mark chapter 5. We'll see you then.